Hi, my name is Dr. Ayaz Afsar, and our topic today is using tests. It's part 2. In the part 1, we discussed different types of tests, how to construct them, and what are different criterions for making tests. In this session, we'll discuss with the format of the test and different ways of developing tests. To begin with, our first point, that is the form of the test. Well, much of the discussion in this session assumes that the test is of the pen and paper variety. Maybe later on we'll discuss about computer-based tests. But most of the tests still are considered to be based on pen and paper. Clearly, this need not to be the case. For example, tests can be written, they can be oral, practical, interactive, computer-based, diagram-based, or a diagrammatic, dramatic, pictorial, photographic, involve the use of audio and video material, presentational and role play, simulations, etc. Oral tests, for example, can be conducted if the researcher feels that reading and writing will obstruct the true purposes of the test. That is, it becomes a reading and writing test rather than, say, a test of mathematics. This does not negate the issue discussed here, for the form of the test will still need to consider, for example, reliability and validity, difficulty, discriminability, discriminability, marking and grading, item analysis, timing, etc. Indeed, most of these factors take on an added signification or take on. Indeed, several of these factors take on an added significance in non-written forms of testing. For example, reliability is a major issue in judging live musical performance or the performance of a gymnastics routine, where one-off event is likely. Furthermore, reliability and validity are significant issues in group performance or group exercises, where group dynamics may prevent a testee's true abilities from being demonstrated. Clearly, the researcher will need to consider whether the test will be undertaken individually or in a group, and what form it will take. How to write the test items. The test will need to address the intended and unintended clues and cues that might be provided in it. For example, some of them have been summarized by Morris et al. 1987. The number of blanks might indicate the number of words required in the test. The number of dots might indicate the number of letters required. The length of blanks might indicate the length of response required, and the space left for completion will give cues about how much to write. Blanks in different parts of a sentence will be assisted by the reader having read the other parts of the sentence. Hannah and Cunningham provide several guidelines for constructing short answer items to overcome some of these problems. What do they suggest? Say, make the blanks close to the end of the sentence, keep the blanks the same length, ensure that there can be only a single correct answer. Avoid putting several blanks close to each other in a sentence or paragraph such that the overall meaning is obscured. Only make blanks of keywords or concepts rather than the trivial words. Avoid addressing only trivial matters. Ensure that students know exactly the kind and specificity of the answer required. Specify the units in which a numerical answer is to be given, and use short answers for testing knowledge recall. With regard to multiple choice items, there are several potential problems. Some of them have been summarized here. Number one, the number of choices in a single multiple choice item, and whether there is one or more right answer or answers. Number two, the number and realism of the destructors in a multiple choice item. For example, there might be many destructors, but many of them are too obvious to be chosen. There may be several redundant items. Number four, the sequence of items and their effects on each other. And lastly, the location of the correct response or responses in a multiple choice item. Well, to construct an effective multiple choice test, one should keep in mind and look at some of the suggestions for constructing effective multiple choice test items. For that purpose, ensure that they catch significant knowledge and learning rather than low-level recall of facts. Frame the nature of the issue in the stem of the item, ensuring that the stem is meaningful in itself. For example, replace the general sheep and give the choices A, graminovirus, B, or cloven-footed, C, usually give birth to one or two calves at a time. With how many lambs are normally born to a sheep at one time? Ensure that the stem includes as much of the item as possible, with no irrelevancies. Avoid negative stems to the item. Keep the readability levels low. Ensure clarity and unambiguity. Ensure that all the options are plausible so that guessing of the only possible option is avoided. Avoid the possibility of students making the correct choice through incorrect reasoning. include some novelty to the item if it is being used to measure understanding. Ensure that there can only be a single correct option. If a single answer is required, and that it is unambiguously the right response. Then avoid syntactical and grammatical clues by making all options syntactically and grammatically parallel, and by avoiding matching the phrasing of a stem with similar phrasing in the response. Avoid including in the stem clues as to which may be the correct response. Ensure that the length of each response item is the same. For example, to avoid one long correct answer from standing out. Keep each option separate, avoiding options which are included in each other. Ensure that the correct option is positioned differently for each item. For example, so that it is not always option 2. Avoid using options like all of the above or none of the above. Avoid answers from one item being used to cue answers to another item. Keep items separate. That was about the multiple choice question if you are going to use in your test. The next type of questions are true-false questions. Morris et al. 1987 and Gronlund and Lin 1990 and Hanna 1993, Cunningham 1998 and Aiken 2003 also indicate particular problems in true-false types of questions. First of all, ambiguity of meaning. Some items might be partly true or partly false. Items that polarize. Being too easy or too hard, most items might be true or false under certain conditions. Number 3, it may not be clear to the student whether facts or opinions are being sought, as this is dichotomous. True and false questions are dichotomous. Students have an even choice. Students have an even chance of guessing the correct answer, and imbalance of true to false statements. Some items might contain absolutes which give powerful clues. For example, always, never, all, and none. How to overcome these problems while constructing true-false questions? Well, to overcome these problems, several points need to be addressed. Number 1, avoid generalized statements as they are usually false. Number 2, avoid trivial questions. Number 3, avoid negatives and double negatives in statements. And number 4, avoid over long and over complex statements. Number 5, ensure that items are rooted in facts. And number 6, ensure that statements can be only true or false. 7, write statements in everyday language. 8, decide where it is appropriate to use degrees, generally, usually, often, etc., as these are capable of interpretation. Number 9, avoid ambiguities. And number 10, ensure that each statement contains only one idea. 11, if an opinion is to be sought, then ensure that it is attributable to a named source. And number 12, ensure that true statements and false statements are equal in length and number. That was about the true and false types of questions. Now we move on to another type or a category of a question which are called matching items. Again, Morris et al. And others indicate particular potential difficulties in matching items. It might be very clear to a student which items in a list simply cannot be matched to items in the other list. For example, by dint of content, grammar, concepts, thereby enabling the students to complete the matching by elimination rather than understanding. So one item in one list might be able to be matched to several items in the other. The list might contain unequal numbers of items, thereby introducing destructors, rendering the selection as much as multiple choice item as a matching exercise. The above mentioned authors also suggest that difficulties in matching items can be addressed in this way. Ensure that the items for matching are homogeneous, similar over the whole test to render guessing more difficult. Avoid constructing matching items to answers that can be worked out by elimination. For example, by ensuring that A, there are different numbers of items in each column, so that there are more options to be matched than there are items. B, students can avoid being able to reduce the field of options as they increase the number of items that they have matched. And C, the same option may be used more than once. Decide whether to mix the two columns of matched items, that is, ensure, if desired, that each column includes both items and options. Then sequence the options for matching so that they are logical and easy to follow, for example, by number or by chronology. Avoid overlong columns and keep the column on a single page. Make the statements in the options column as brief as possible. Avoid ambiguity by ensuring that there is a clearly suitable option that stands out from its rivals, and make it clear what the nature of the relationship should be between the option and the item, on what items they relate to each other, and number the items and later the options. Now move on to another type of questions which are usually given or found on a test. They are called essay questions. With regard to essay questions, there are several advantages that can be claimed. For example, an essay as an open form of testing enables complex learning outcomes to be measured. It enables the student to integrate, apply, and synthesize knowledge, to demonstrate the ability for expression and self-expression, and to demonstrate higher order and divergent cognitive processes. On the other hand, essays have been criticized for yielding unreliable data, for being prone to unreliable, inconsistent and variable scoring, and neglectful of intended learning outcomes, and prone to marker bias and preference, being too intuitive, subjective, holistic, and time-consuming to mark. So how to improve these drawbacks or shortcomings in essay type of questions? Well, the essay question must be restricted to those learning outcomes that are unable to be measured more objectively. Number two, the essay question must ensure that it is clearly linked to desired learning outcomes, and that it is clear what behavior the student must demonstrate. The essay question must indicate the field and task very clearly. For example, words like compare, justify, critique, summarize, classify, analyze, clarify, examine, apply, evaluate, synthesize, contrast, explain, illustrate. Time limits are set for each essay. Options are avoided, or if options are to be given, ensure that if students have a list of titles from which to choose, each title is equally difficult and equally capable of enabling the student to demonstrate achievement, understanding, etc. Next issue related with the test is how to mark them. So marking criteria are prepared and are explicit, indicating what must be included in the answers and the points to be awarded for such inclusions, or ratings to be scored for the extent to which certain criteria have been met. Decisions are agreed on how to address and score irrelevancies, inaccuracies, poor grammar, and spelling. The work is double marked, blind, and where appropriate, without the marker knowing the name of the essay writer. Clearly, these are issues of reliability. The issue here, or the problem here, is that layout can exert a profound effect on the test. So let's move from the marking to the layout of the test. So deciding on the layout will include the following factors: the nature, length and clarity of the instructions. For example, what to do, how long to take, how much to do, how many items to attempt, what kind of response is required. For example, a single word, a sentence, a paragraph, a formula, a number, a statement, etc. How and where to enter the response, where to show the working out of a problem, where to start new answers. For example, in a separate booklet, in one answer only required to a multiple choice item, or is more than one answer required spread out the instructions through the test. Then avoid overloading students with too much information at first and providing instructions for each sections as they come to it, what marks are to be awarded for each part of the test, minimizing ambiguity and taking care over the readability of the items. So the progression from the easy to the more difficult items of the test, the location and sequence of items, the visual layout of the page, for example, avoiding overloading students with visual material or words, the grouping of items, keeping together items that have the same contents or the same format, the setting out of the answer sheets or location so that they can be entered onto computers and read by optical mark readers and scanners if appropriate. So the layout of the text should be such that it supports the completion of the task and that this is done as efficiently and as effectively as possible for the students. So the next point is to consider the timing of the test. How long it will take to complete the test. So the timing refers to two areas. When the test will take place, the day of the week, month, time of day, and the time allowances to be given to the test and its component items. So with regard to the former, in part this is a matter of reliability, for the time of day or week, etc., might influence how alert, motivated, or capable a student might be. With regard to the latter, the researcher will need to decide what time restrictions are being imposed and why. For example, is the pressure of a time constraint desirable? To show what a student can do under time pressure, or an unnecessary time constraint desirable, or it is an unnecessary hurdle or impediment, putting a time boundary around something that need to be bounded. Although it is vital that students know what the overall time allowance is for the test, clearly it might be helpful to indicate notional time allowances for different elements of the test. If they are aligned to the relative weightings of the test, they enable students to decide where to place emphasis in the test. They may want to concentrate their time on the high scoring elements of the test. Further, if the items of the test have exact time allowances, this enables a degree of standardization to be built into the test, and this may be useful if the results are going to be used to compare individuals or groups. Okay. Next, there is a need to plan the scoring of the test, how the test will be marked, and what grades, and how the grades will be awarded to the test. The awarding of scores for different items of the test is a clear indication of the relative significance of each item. The weightings of each item are addressed in their scoring. It is important to ensure that easier parts of the test attract fewer marks than more difficult parts of it. Otherwise, our students' results might be artificially inflated by answering many easy questions and fewer more difficult questions. Additionally, there are several attractions to making the scoring of tests as detailed and specific as possible. Awarding specific points for each item and sub-item, for example, it enables partial completion of the task to be recognized. Students gain marks in proportion to how much of the task they have completed successfully. It is an important feature of domain referencing, which we discussed in our previous lecture session. It enables a student to compensate for doing badly in some parts of a test by doing well in other parts of the test. It enables weightings to be made explicit to the students. It enables the rewards for successful completion of parts of a test to reflect considerations such as the length of the item, the time required to complete it, its level of difficulty, its level of importance. It facilitates moderation because it is clear and specific. It enables comparisons to be made across groups by item, and it enables reliability indices to be calculated. Scores can be aggregated and converted into grades straightforwardly. Scoring will also need to be prepared to handle issues of poor spelling, grammar, and punctuation. Is it to be penalized? And how will consistency be assured here? Furthermore, how will issues of omission be treated? For example, if a student omits the units of measurement like miles per hour, dollars or pounds, meters or centimeters, these are some of the issues related about the marking or scoring of the test. Now, The next step is reporting the results. How the results be compiled and presented. So related to the scoring of the test is the issue of reporting the results. If the scoring of a test is specific, then this enables variety in reporting to be addressed. For example, results may be reported item by item, section by section, or whole test by whole test. This degree of flexibility might be useful for the teacher, as it will enable particular strengths and weaknesses in groups of students to be exposed. The desirability of some of the above points is open to question, of course. For example, it could be argued that the strength of criterion referencing is precisely its specificity, and that to aggregate data, for example, to assign grades, is to lose the very purpose of the criterion referencing. For example, if a student is awarded a grade E for spelling in English and a grade A for imaginative writing, this could be aggregated into a C grade as an overall grade of the student's English language competence of the learner or the student. But what does this C grade mean in this scenario? It is meaningless. It has no frame of reference or clear criteria. It loses the useful specificity of the A and E grades. It is a compromise that actually tells us nothing. Further, aggregating such grades assumes equal levels of difficulty of all items. Of course, raw scores are still open to interpretation, which is a matter of judgment rather than exactitude or precision. For example, if a test is designed to assess mastery of a subject, then the researcher is faced with the issue of deciding what constitutes mastery. Is it an absolute, that is very high score, or are there gradations? And if the latter means gradations, then where do these gradations fall? For published tests, the scoring is standardized and already made clear, as are the conversions of scores into, for example, percentiles and grades. Underpinning the discussion of scoring is the need to make it unequivocally clear exactly what the marking criteria are, what will and will not score points. This requires a clarification of whether there is a checklist of features that must be present in a student's answer. Clearly, criterion-referenced tests will have to declare their lowest boundary, a cutoff point, below which the student has been deemed to fail to meet the criteria. A compromise can be seen in those criterion-referenced tests that award different grades for different levels of performance of the same task, necessitating the clarification of different cutoff points in the examination. A common example of this can be seen in the GCSE examination for secondary school pupils in the United Kingdom, where students can achieve a grade between A and F for a criterion-related examination. The issue of scoring takes in a range of factors. For example, grade norms, age norms, percentile norms, and standard score norms. Okay, the next point is about devising a pretest and post-test. So the construction and administration of tests is an essential part of any experimental model of research, where a pretest and a post-test have to be devised for the control and experimental groups. The pretest and post-test must adhere to certain guidelines, such as the pretest may have questions which differ in form or wording from the post-test. Though the two tests must test the same content, that is, they will be alternate forms of a test for the same groups. The pretest must be the same for the control and experimental groups. The post-test must be the same for both groups. Care must be taken in the construction of a post-test to avoid making the test easier to complete by one group than another. The level of difficulty must be the same in both tests, that is, pre-test and post-test. Test data features certainly in the experimental model of research, and additionally they may feature as part of a questionnaire, interview, and documentary material. Then comes the issue of reliability and validity of the test. Suffice it here to say that reliability concerns the degree of confidence that can be placed in the results and the data, which is often a matter of statistical calculation and subsequent test redesigning. Validity, on the other hand, concerns the extent to which the test tests what it is supposed to test. This devolves a content validity, construct validity, face validity, criterion related, and concurrent validity. Well, there are certain ethical issues in preparing tests, and now we move to that part of the test. What are the ethical issues related with preparing the test? Well, a major source of unreliability of test data derives from the extent and ways in which students have been prepared for the test. These can be located on a continuum from direct and specific preparation through indirect and general preparation to no preparation at all. With a growing demand for test data, for example, for selection purposes, for certification, for grading, for employment, for tracking, for entry to higher education, for accountability, for judging schools and teachers, there is a perhaps understandable pressure to prepare students for all these types of tests. This is the high stakes aspect of testing, where much hinges on the test results. At one level, this can be seen in the backwash effect of examinations on curricula and syllabuses. At another level, it can lead to the direct preparation of students for specific examinations. So preparation can take many forms, such as ensuring coverage among other program contents and objectives of the objectives and program that will be tested, restricting the coverage of the program content and objectives to only those that will be tested, preparing students with exam technique, practicing with past or similar papers, directly matching the teaching to specific test items, okay, where each piece of teaching and contents is the same as each test item, practicing on an exactly parallel form of the test, telling student in advance what will appear on the test, practicing on and preparing the identical test itself. For example, giving out test papers in advance without teacher input, practicing on and preparing the identical test itself. For example, giving out the test papers in advance with the teacher working through the items, maybe providing sample answers. How ethical it would be to undertake the final four of these is perhaps questionable, or indeed any part from the first on the list. Are they cheating or legitimate test preparation? Should one teach to a test? Is not to do so a dereliction of duty? For example, in criterion and domain reference tests, are giving students an unfair advantage and thus reducing the reliability of the test as a true and fair measure of ability or achievement. In high-stakes assessment, there is even the issue of not entering for tests students whose performance will be low. So there is a risk of a correlation between the stakes and the degree of unethical practice. The greater the stakes, the greater the incidence of unethical practice. There are certain ethical issues even in preparing for tests. Unethical practice, observes Gibbs 1994, occurs where scores are inflated but reliable inference on performance or achievement is not, and where different groups of students are prepared differentially for tests. That is, giving some students an unfair advantage over others. To overcome such problems, the writer suggests it is ethical and legitimate for teachers to teach to a broader domain than the test. That the teacher should not teach directly to the test, and the situation should only be that better instructions rather than test preparation is acceptable. So one can add to this list of considerations that tests must be valid and reliable. The administration, marking, and use of the test should be undertaken only by suitably competent and qualified people. That is, people and projects should be vetted. Then access to test materials should be controlled. Thus, test items should not be reproduced apart from selections in professional publication. The test should be released only to suitably qualified professionals in connection with specific professionally acceptable projects. Then tests should benefit the testee, beneficence factor. Clear marking and grading protocols should exist. Test results are reported only in a way that cannot be misinterpreted. The privacy and dignity of individuals should be respected. For example, confidentiality, anonymity, non-traceability. Individuals should not be harmed by the test or its results. So, that is a non-maleficence factor. Informed consent to participate in the test should be sought in advance. Well, those were some of the ethical issues concerning for preparing the test. Now, move on to another aspect of the test, and that is computerized adaptive tests or testing. Well, computerized adaptive testing is the decision on which particular test items to administer, which is based on the subject's responses to previous items. It is particularly useful for large-scale testing, where a wide range of ability can be expected. Here, a test must be devised that enables the tester to cover this wide range of ability. Hence, it must include some easy to some difficult items, too easy, and it does not enable a range of high ability to be charted, too difficult, and it does not enable a range of low ability to be charted. So we find out very little about a testee if we ask a battery of questions which are too easy or too difficult. Further, it is more efficient and reliable if a test can avoid the problem for high ability testees of having to work through a mass of essay items. It is more efficient and reliable if a test can avoid the problem for high ability testees of having to work through a mass of easy items in order to reach the more difficult items, and for low ability testees of having to try to guess the answers to more difficult items. Hence, it is useful to have a test that is flexible and that can be adapted to the testees. For example, if a testee found an item too hard, the next item could adapt to this and be easier. And conversely, if a testee was successful on an item, the next item could be harder, and that it could be easily controlled in a computerized adaptive testing. Computers here provide an ideal opportunity to address the flexibility, discriminability, and efficiency of testing. Computer adaptive testing can reduce the number of test items present to around 50% of those used in conventional tests. So testees can work at their own pace. They need not be discouraged, but can be challenged. The test is scored instantly to provide feedback to the testee. A greater range of items can be included in the test, and a greater degree of precision and reliability of measurement can be achieved. Indeed, test security can be increased, and the problem of understanding answer sheets is avoided. Clearly, the use of computer adaptive testing has several putative attractions. On the other hand, it requires different skills from traditional tests, and these might compromise the reliability of the test. For example, the mental processes required to work with a computer screen and computer program differ from those required for a pen and paper test. Motivation and anxiety levels increase or decrease when testees work with computers. So the physical environment might exert a significant difference. For example, lighting, glare from the screen, noise from machines, loading and running the software. Reliability also shifts from an index of the variability of the test to an index of the standard error of the testee's performance. So the usual formula for calculating standard error assumes that error variance is the same for all scores. Whereas in item response theory, it is assumed that error variance depends on each testee's ability. The conventional statistic of error variance calculates a single average variance of summed scores. Whereas in item response theory, this is at best very crude and at worst misleading, as variation is a function of ability rather than test variation and cannot fairly be summed. Computer adaptive testing requires a large item pool for each area of content domain to be developed with sufficient numbers, variety, and spread of difficulty. All items must measure a single aptitude or dimension, and the items must be independent of each other. That is, a person's response to an item should not depend on that person's response to another item. The items have to be pre-tested and validated. Their difficulty and discriminability calculated. The effect of destructors reduced. The capability of the test to address unidimensionality and multidimensionality to be clarified, and the rules for selecting items to be enacted. Well, most of this lecture was based on the information from this particular book, and I will recommend it for further reading. It is by Cohen L. and Manion L. And the title of the book is Research Methods in Education, and it is 7th edition. It was published in 2012, and the place of publication is London, and the publishers are Routledge. Very useful book for using tests as tools or techniques for research. With this is the end of this session, and in this way we have completed part 1 and part 2 of using tests in research. In part 1 we discussed different types of tests, purposes of tests, and the construction of tests. And in the second part we discussed different forms of tests and different problems with different types of questions, the multiple choice questions, true false questions, essay type questions, and then some ethical issues related with constructing the tests, holding the tests, and preparing for the test. And then in the end we discuss computerized adaptive tests, which are gaining momentum, and some of their benefits. So that is the end of this session, and thank you very much for listening.